All right. Hi, folks. I'm Pooja, the co-founder and CEO of VenEx, and I'm super excited to launch VenExcellers, a series of podcasts where we will be interviewing progressive and dynamic leaders who are excelling in their fields and making this world of ours a better place. For our first, we have David Mann, Vice President, Human Resources at Percipient.ai. David is a progressive HR leader with over 20 years of experience working at and advising startups at large companies, including Google, where he was a senior people partner. Warm welcome to you, David.
Well, thank you, Pooja. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important concept and excited to be part of sharing what you all are doing with the world. I think it's an impressive body of work, and more folks need to be seeing it. So I'm happy to be a part of that.
Thanks so much, David. So, David, of course, this is our first ever episode of VenExcellers, and it gives me immense pleasure to host you as our first guest. Because we've known each other for a few months now, but we actually met as strangers. And what's been incredible, besides, of course, your rich experience, is your warm, open, candid demeanor and a very, very progressive mindset. And hence, for a first ever episode, we couldn't think of anyone else more fitting. So warm welcome to you once again.
Thank you for that. And if the intention of that warm opening was to put a little extra pressure on me, mission accomplished. I feel
Not at all.
a high amount of regard for you and your colleagues, and I certainly don't want to let anyone down. So here we go.
Not at all. So I know you'll be as candid as you've always been.
Yeah,
so that's
for sure.
wonderful. Yes. So David, given your rich experience in building organizations and working on compensation, we would just like to hear your perspective on this very important subject of compensation models, its importance, the issues and opportunities related to that, right? And so we do have a set of about 5-6 questions. So we just kind of seek your input. So you're just kind of starting with the first, David. So David, what's really your perspective on the relevance of compensation models to businesses today?
Well, I think it's a great opening question, and we go to work. We don't go to play. And there's a lot of blurring of the lines these days between people being entrepreneurial and kind of fulfilling their passions and following their passions. But at the core, we go to work to provide for our livelihoods and our families and the things that matter. And what I think is really interesting, even at this point in kind of the information age revolution, is that the fundamentals of compensation have not changed in a very long time. You still have your base pay or your hourly pay. You still have your potential for bonus earnings. You still may be on a commission plan that talks about OTE based on deliverables and sales metrics. And you've got equity as a carrot that we are all kind of wooed and mystified by in a lot of ways. And so while the work we have done has transformed over the last 20 or 30 years, the way that we pay has not been wildly transformative. And I think one of the things that I found compelling about VenEx is that you're kind of transforming that, but more importantly, you are transforming it from within. And I think that's the next wave for us when we come to compensation. And I trust we'll get more into the specifics of what your product does and how your orientation manifests in the compensation practices of companies that want to embrace it. But I do think it's interesting because we're at a point in time where we're putting more onus and more responsibility in the hands of employees. But this aspect of how we compensate them has remained very flat and uninteresting and unchanged over the years. And I think that because of that, there is a kind of an outsized impact that companies hold over the compensation of employees. And again, the thing that I think that VenEx is doing in a really interesting and innovative way is putting some of that control and agency back into the hands of employees or prospective employees. And so I do think that while the model has stayed largely the same and unchanged with a few tweaks here and there, what you are talking about is a potentially transformative, revolution in how we compensate. Not in necessarily the what of the compensation. Dollars are always going to be dollars, and that's always going to be a consistent. But how the employee values those dollars, how we talk about it, how we incentivize for various aspects of our compensation is now in a position where it can transfer a lot of that agency to the employees based on what you all have done. So I think this is an exciting time for us. And at the same time, for a lot of companies, it's a really boring time because they just want to keep doing what they've always done. They've always enjoyed that upper hand. They've always enjoyed being able to control the burn rate and so on of their early stage companies. And I think that there's wisdom and value in that. But this solution that you all are creating really creates an opportunity for companies who think differently about compensation to compensate their people in a different way. And so I'm excited, as I said a few times here.
No, thanks, David. That's, it's great to have your validation on sort of the problem statement that we're working on. Of course, we understand compensation extremely key to, the organizations in general. And, it's great to have your validation that it is indeed a high value problem. And there are, of course, issues, as you're highlighting with these. So, for the benefit of the audience that we have, if you could just explain what are really sort of the different models broadly, what do you think are like the issues with these? So, with each of these, yeah.
I'll try and do a good job of this. I probably will fail, but I'll give it a go. The basic compensation these days is made up of a few different components. You have your base pay, or your kind of salary. You've got the potential to earn bonuses based on performance. If you're in a sales or a variable comp environment, then you have variable comp that is driven by the sales metrics and whether it's deals closed, size of the deals, revenue to the company, whatever it is, there's some kind of sliding scale metric that you can potentially be incentivized by. And then, of course, there's equity, which is something that we all hope when we join an early company will be worth a whole lot. And if you join a stable company, then you know the market value. You get to watch it every day on your stock ticker and see what it's worth in the open marketplace and think about your wealth in that perspective. So those basic components really make up the foundation of, like I said earlier, what's been done for a long time. And what compensation is being kind of portrayed as these days. The mix of those components is where the real juice is for me. It's where the excitement is. It's where the opportunity to match your interest, Pooja, as an employee with the company's interest as a company and provide the right composition of salary-based bonus and stock in such a way that you get super motivated by these things. And again, what you all are doing is allowing people to have some agency in deciding how much of each of those components they get based on a funding envelope that's been provided by the company, of course, but they can decide if how they want to orchestrate and design their compensation. And then next year, if they want to do something slightly different, they can do something slightly different based on the status of the company and what they're doing. So that's kind of the way I see things here. And as I said, I don't think it's gotten particularly interesting in over the last 15, 20 years. I think it's been pretty steady and common. And if I was to ask one of my mentors what their early day compensation package comprised of, they'd probably say base, bonus, and equity. And that's kind of the way it's always been.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I think that's that's one of the biggest issues that, the last innovation in the compensation space is equity. And that's itself a 100-year-old model. And the world has changed tremendously. And, I think post-COVID, and I think we've talked about that, the change post-COVID. And if you could maybe speak a bit about that, how the work has changed and what sort of challenges that's brought in and how maybe potentially compensation may be able to solve for that.
Well, work has changed tremendously thanks to COVID. It used to be, and I was a great example of this, so I'll use myself as an example. I would get up very early in the morning. I would get on a shuttle to go to my offices at Google. I would work all day. I would get on the same shuttle at the end of the day and go home. When COVID hit, everything kind of changed. And not only did we all not get on those shuttles and go into those offices. But we all started really rethinking the value of time and mobility and the ability to work anywhere we want when we want to work. And so while there has always been talk of a work-life balance or work-life integration, now things became very different. Everything kind of became a blur. In our house, we worked, I don't want to say, excuse me, around the clock because that sounds terrible, but we were kind of always on. And that was just how things happened. For a lot of us, I think we learned through that process that that's not sustainable, nor is it remotely enjoyable. And so we want to have more agency over how we work, when we work, where we work, and therefore how we are compensated. And so, add to that mix that we had this incredibly bright period during COVID where some really cool entrepreneurial stuff started happening. The ability to be a podcast host or an influencer, like these things just took off like crazy. And all of a sudden we're flooded with people who are solopreneurs, doing fractional work and things like that, and really using compensation in a super creative way, even though their partner companies or their employers weren't, but they're using compensation to create a composite life for themselves. And now that COVID has ended, that appetite to have that composite still exists, but companies don't know what to do with it. I think they're just reverting back to, well, this is the way we've always done it. So here's your base, here's your bonus, here's your stock, and those things. And so it has kind of created this odd dichotomy of what the employees really want, but maybe don't know how to articulate, what the company wants and is very clear on how to articulate. And so these things are kind of meshing together, but in a fairly clunky sort of way, Pooja. It's a confounding reality that we have to confront. And the basics of it is this: in order for companies to maintain more control, they actually have to cede more control to their employees, to be more creative about how they're compensated. And if they want more equity in 2025 than they had in 2024, but they're willing to take a lower base, then that's something that should be within the purview of the employee to kind of fine tune based on their life circumstances and what's going on with them. But companies aren't waking up to that for some reason. They really want the predictability of year over year continuity and consistency. They want to be able to show their boards X, Y, and Z data that shows the stability of the business, which is something we all should appreciate and strive for. But there is a win to be had if you can be more creative about how you distribute and let employees decide the distribution of the resources that are allocated to them.
Right. So I think, one of the things, David, we've of course spoken about, right? And is also, I think, before I move there, the bit about productivity, and, there's a lot of movement of companies wanting to get employees back into the office, because it's, they're concerned about productivity. And one of the things we've just kind of wondered, and we feel like VenEx could be a great solution there, is that if you're trying to drive productivity and you're forcing people, that ain't going to happen really, because the world has moved on really.
Right.
So, one of the things could be to use compensation really to drive that productivity in a far more structural manner. Like, for example, you're aware of the Wealth Point solution that we have, right? Which is enabling employees to have a more predictable wealth creation versus models like equity, and also sort of cater to the medium risk, medium appetite sort of an individual, which is what I think most of the workforce today is. So one of the insights we have at VenEx is that equity based models are great, but they are obviously high risk, high return, especially for sort of pre-IPO companies. And if they're high risk, high return, and the employees are more medium risk, medium return, then isn't there really a mismatch in terms of force fitting the employee or the workforce to a model which is actually more suitable to investors? I mean, it was really meant in some sense for them, and it works really well for them. That's what the business model is. 1 out of 2 companies, as we know, in the VC portfolio is likely to really return on the 10x, 100x return. But that really means that employees have to work for 10 companies, which is what you see a lot of startup employees do today. But so what we're really questioning is, so fundamentally, is there something wrong here? Because you have a tool which is high risk, high return. You have employees who are medium risk, medium return?
Yeah.
And, you know, is equity really the right tool, or is there something that has got to be created which is really medium risk, medium return for them? So there is that element. And of course, we'll come to the productivity aspect and how we believe compensation can help employees sort of do more partaking in the success of the company in a more predictable manner. And therefore, I mean, if they have some partaking in the business, they're likely to be more aligned, and irrespective of where they're working. If that alignment is there, it does not matter whether you're physically present in office. But this is, these are certain of our perspectives. And over back to you, David, just to sort of hear your comments on that.
Well, I go back to something you started with, which is, kind of high risk, high reward. I would liken most pre-IPO equity as high risk, no reward. Because the number of companies that get through and make something happen is slim and getting slimmer. The number of companies that create value, like real wealth and value for the long term for their employees through an IPO or an acquisition, it doesn't happen that often. More often than not, the long tail of funding dries out, and maybe a company will be able to survive on their operating revenue alone, and they kind of stumble along for a while until they get acquired or something like that. And then if you've lasted the 9, 10, 11 years, then there's a payout in the end. But most I don't know the numbers on this. It would be very interesting to know what percentage of equity gets returned back to the cap table based on attrition. And I do feel like because of that, there is a little bit of a shell game being played towards employees sometimes, particularly when the employees don't have, again, agency or understanding of how much equity am I being granted? What is that equity actually worth? What is the long-term viability of our business, and what's the likelihood of an IPO or something happening where there's an event that I can get some cash from? I do think that is confusing to people, and it has created some unsettling in the workforce, because if you've been in a couple of startups and you've been there 3, 4, 5 years, long enough to fully vest, but nothing's happened in those 3, 4, 5 years, you start questioning, like, why am I doing this? Why am I placing such a premium on this chunk of equity when it actually is not worth anything? And in reality, it doesn't cost the company anything other than opportunity loss at the time in the distribution or dilution of the cap table. So there's some interesting stuff happening there. I don't think people are particularly savvy about that dynamic, and I don't think we're talking about it nearly enough. And you mentioned the wealth points concept, and what I love about that is it says that, hey, we're investing X number of points in you. You use them as you see fit. If you want to access more equity over time, great. We'll give you some kind of a grant that starts a 4-year vest based on what you've been granted. Terrific. Or a 3-year vest, whatever it is. If you want to drive that wealth point to your spiff or bonus or something like that, terrific. We have accounted for that in our financial planning. We are not going to say no. That wealth point is yours to use however you want. If you want to drive it to your long-term salary and your base, okay, that's fine too. The weighting of those expenditures is something that employees get to have some understanding of, and therefore they can make some really informed decisions about how they want to, again, kind of composite build their compensation in such a way that will motivate them to do the work that needs to get done. That's the thing we're all pulling for, hopefully, is that we want to do the work that needs to get done to create some kind of an event in our future that does return and recognize the value we've built.
Absolutely. Yeah, so on that point, David, what as per you are like the ideal features or requirements of an ideal compensation model? Maybe from let's just speak about it for the employer and then maybe for the employee.
Yeah, it's a great question. From the employer side, we need to know that we're not going to get surprises. We can't handle surprises. So there needs to be an established funding envelope with which there will not be an excess of. So a really smart CFO can say, hey, it's time for us to do, let's pretend, an annual performance cycle. Last year, we bumped salaries by 5%. Let's plan to bump salaries again, this time by 6.5% across the company, which is a pretty generous number sometimes. Let's account for that. Let's also look at the bonus pool, if we will, and think about what's that dollar allocation going to look like. We want to make sure that we factor that into our modeling. And then they need to look at the equity that's available in the company and the cap table status. Is there additional or enough equity to incentivize your top performers, the people you want to have around for the long term? They need to be able to plan for that and forecast for that based on future funding initiatives. If they're going to go after a round next year and they need to have X number of shares available to the investment community, they can't necessarily take that away and give it to the employees at this moment. So they need to be mindful of that. So there's got to be a financial plan that accounts for the variables that are at play here. For the employees, it really has to be an understanding of what matters to me today and what's going to matter for me next year at this time. And can I get myself on a path where I feel like I know what I want, I know what I need, I know what I'm willing to work for, I know what's going to motivate me, and I know that based on those things, I'm being compensated fairly. Now, it may be that I sit next to someone who's got the exact same job as I do, and their compensation looks dramatically different. And that's the beauty of this, is that as long as we're within that funding envelope that the finance organization has set, we shouldn't care on the company side whether employee one and employee two have dramatically, different composition of their compensation. We should just be excited that they're both getting what they want. And I think that that's the transformative opportunity that lies ahead here, is for us to relinquish some of that consistency control and put it in the hands of the employees. Now, let me, before I, even take a break with my breath, let me make sure to get out there that we still need to have salary surveys and leveling guides and all of the superstructure that exists. But let's remember, salary levels are not necessarily finite numbers. They are ranges, right? So if we put a range for a job that says between X and X plus 5, like, who's to say one employee can't have X and one employee can't have X plus 5? It just means that another allocation somewhere in the bonus or in the equity comes down a little bit to compensate for that actual cash outlay. And that's why I think this area is so ripe for transformation, Pooja, because this thinking that you all have, as revolutionary as it's not that revolutionary. We're just giving the people what they want, and you're doing it in an elegant, consistent, safe for the company, motivating for the employee sort of way. And I am quite excited about the possibilities here.
Well, thanks, David. So absolutely, I think these are, of course, very, very important sort of, I think, requirements for each of them. And I think you've spoken once to me about the adaptive, the importance to have a model which is also adaptive to business, right?
Yes.
So would love to have your comments on that as well. And yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's just it. Like, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but this is your approach will prove to be adaptive to business circumstances as well as the employee motivations, and whether that is, again, employee one, employee two having different motivations or changes in the external world. For the company's perspective, if you're trying to go to market and get a round of funding, but you're finding that the capital markets are very unfriendly for whatever reason, they're always unfriendly, right? If you're finding that's a problem, then you can toggle, different parts of the compensation mechanism to be responsive to that. And if there's a conversation that needs to be said, something around, hey, we're finding that the valuation in the fundraising rounds is not as high as we'd like to see. Therefore, we're having to give away more actual options and shares to the investment community. That means, therefore, that fewer of those are available to employees. So you're going to find a 10% reduction in the available, amount of equity that you're going to see. For the past 3 years, you've seen you have, 50,000 options as part of your wealth point distribution. Now you're going to see it's down to about 28, 30,000. Just this is why, right? So it begets a conversation, and it creates some financial literacy that otherwise is not there. And it also gives us an opportunity to talk with our employees and listen about what matters to them. And I think that too is something that creates a more healthy, predictive, and adaptive ecosystem for us to get stuff done as an organization.
Right. Right, absolutely. And David, in terms of, one of the things is also the pay transparency. There's a lot of sort of movement in the US around having that pay transparency. And I think equity doesn't really fall in that bracket. You really don't have that sort of transparency that you would endeavor to have. And I think that's one of the gaps that, Venex and Wealth Points is trying to fill, where you're providing transparency in terms of the value of wealth, the event, so long as one is a going concern. What is elastic is, of course, the timeline. There is a certain predictability. If plan is met, you get it within a prescribed period. Else, it's of course going to take longer, or it could be faster if you're sort of doing better than plan. But there is a little bit more handle on this versus sort of equity. So yeah, your comments on equity, pay transparency, and how are these things sort of meshing? And where is the opportunity there?
Well, it's a really great point. I do think there's been a lot of interest in pay transparency and pay consistency, and I'm all for it. From like work should be paid like. I think that's why that's why in my company, our company, we have pay scales and ranges that are market based. We don't just make stuff up. We don't just talk to our buddy over at that other company and see what they're doing and do the same, or do the same plus one. We try to use real objective market data and do our absolute best to match people based on our talent assessment of where we think they fit, what their potential is, what their experiences are, based on conversations with them, certainly during the hiring process. And then for those who are here, we still have those conversations on a regular basis, like, what are your interests in? Here's what the company needs. Would you be interested in that as well? You've shown talent in XYZ area. Let's talk about what your growth plan looks like, and so on. So there is a huge opportunity for companies to have, what are otherwise kind of, and have otherwise been seen as hard conversations or tricky conversations. This brings us a chance to have more objective, transparent, consistent conversations with a wider array of folks, and to open the kind of financial kimono a bit and allow people to understand what it is that makes the business work, how we're going to make money, how we're going to grow, the importance of achieving certain milestones and deliverables, because that propels, either fundraising or an acquisition or an IPO or customer wins, whatever. It just allows us to talk about stuff that we haven't talked enough about, in all likelihood. And I do think that is part of this transformative opportunity that you all are creating.
Right. Thank you so much, David, for sharing all of your perspectives on all of these things. I think the last question maybe for the day that we would have for you would be around, team ownership, and how well are the current forms of compensation really trying to do that. First of all, the importance of team ownership in general, your views on that, and then how well or not are the current forms of compensation really delivering on that today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish that my kind of read on things was a little different, but it is what it is, and so I'll just have to own that. I think team ownership is really tricky. Because on the one hand, every company talks about how important it is for work to get done as a team, how people should be selfless, and put them, their own needs behind that of the team, and do whatever is needed to lift people up and to get the work done. The flip side of that is, when I was at Google, tremendous amount of time and energy went into building promotion packets where people basically outlaid their heroics, saying, I did this, and this, all this stuff, therefore I should get promoted. I feel like the right fit is somewhere in between. People should be recognized for the contributions that they make, but there is a really big kind of conversation to be had around, there's the what you delivered, and then there's the how you have delivered that. And when a manager or a VP or a team lead or something like that has been given a bonus pool or some finite amount of a resource, whether it's equity or cash, they need to take into consideration the what got done and the how it got done, and make hard choices. And if we're not talking about those hard choices openly and transparently, then people are going to get surprised, and then they're going to be further surprised when they are told, hey, you had a great quarter, great year, whatever the time frame is. You delivered these things, you did it with excellence, and therefore you have this mediocre bump in pay. I think there's some cognitive dissonance around that. Like, hold on a second, I did everything you said I needed to do, but I'm not seeing the positive flow through. I'm not seeing the outcome financially in a way that matters to me. And this, again, is where the Wealth Point model has tremendous ability to potentially close these gaps. Because again, if I'm a manager and I know, employee one values X, Y, and Z, and employee two values P, D, and C, I can kind of massage the rewards in a way that is meaningful to each person, and give them both what they want, instead of it being a finite, robbing Peter to pay Paul type of a thing. So, and that, by the way, does not work. we know, because we know people talk about their compensation, and we know that oftentimes there's a comparison that happens after the fact, like, I can't believe so and so got that promotion, or before me, or I can't believe they got a bigger bonus than I did, type of thing. Like, we on the employer side think we have a lot more control over that narrative than we actually do, which is why it's really important to be sensitive to what people want and to try and give it to them.
Sure. So yeah, so I think you're really talking about more control to employees to really design their pay,
Yeah.
have like a more predictability around it. It's a day and age where I would say pizza delivery time is known. The T of it is completely known, right? And we're at a phase where employees don't even know, sort of what are they really going to get at the end of the day, and how is the company's success, how are they going to drive it. They probably know how they're going to drive it, but what are they going to get out of it, and how predictably so, right? And we do hear of a lot of cases of people leaving a lot of equity on the table because they just did not really realize, and yes, I mean, they did not have the right risk appetite to really take care of it. So yeah, so I think David, this has been fantastic. Any sort of last comments you may want to add before we close the session?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is this: like, this area has been unchanged for a very long time, and the companies that really want to win great talent and motivate and grow that talent while they work for them have to be open to new and nuanced ideas like this breaking through the old way of doing things. And it could be on 25 different fronts, but this particular area around compensation is so personal and so deeply nuanced that this kind of broad brush approach that we've been using for so long is just it's not doing it anymore. So I'm excited to see what happens. I'm excited to rally other progressive HR leaders like myself to be open and to hear what you all are doing. I do think there is a revolution underway, and it'll be exciting to see that happen. And I want to be a part of it.
Well, absolutely, David. We won't be able to do this without you. So thank you so much for sharing your views so candidly, as always. I think that's the most appreciative bit about the interactions, extremely candid like this one. So thank you so much for sharing that, and our being part of our first ever VenExcellers series. And yes, we would love to host more such progressive leaders like yourself on the show, and we would love to have you back again very soon. So thank you very, very much, David, for for sharing your views with our audience, with your sort of network so candidly, and we really hope to change the world for the better. I think it's really high time. Equity has been a pain point personally for me, to be very honest. I know the story is shared by a lot of people, and we really do want to change that for the era to come, right? For the new workforce. So let's really hope we can do that jointly.
I'm excited for you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. to be your first guest here. I would love to be invited back. Let's get some other folks in here and hear some different voices. But whenever you want, you've got me.
Thank you so much, David.
You bet.
Have a great day.
You
Bye-bye.
too.